important week in China. A historical resolution was passed by the Communist Party of China, third only in the 100-year history of the party, paving way for Xi Jinping's third term as president. A party that began with only 12 members now stands at 19 million, strong and growing and holding sway over 1.4 billion people.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, the uncontested leader of the world's most populous nation, headed a pivotal plenary of the ruling party's top figures that set the tone for his bid for long-term rule.
The participants all agreed that with the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping as the core, charting the course and taking the helm, and with the solidarity of the whole party, the whole military and the whole Chinese people, no obstacle or hardship is to hold back the marching forward of the Chinese people.
The meeting focused on studying and comprehensively summarizing major achievements and historical experience of the party in the past 1 century, and deliberate upon or reviewing the draft of another historical resolution.
To me, the most important takeaway is how, through this resolution, President Xi Jinping has put himself in the same league as other Chinese stalwarts like Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. The other key takeaway from the meeting is the timing and the rationale behind the new resolution. If we look at history, the earlier 2 resolutions were taken when China faced complicated and changing domestic and international situation, and there was a serious lack of unity in the ideology within the party. In the present context too, China is facing pressure from all sides. From the China-US competition, the deteriorating ties with various countries in Chinese economies, downward risks. Now the question arises, has there been an insufficient unity of thinking within the party about where China is going under President Xi Jinping, that a new resolution had to be adopted at this point in time?
This is the third historical resolution in the history of the CPC in a century. First was the resolution on certain historical issues, adopted by the 7th plenary session of the 6th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China in April 1945. Second was the resolution on certain historical issues of the party, adopted by the 6th plenary session of the 11th Central Committee of the party unanimously in June 1981.
They shape the country's developmental course in concrete ways. They can be life-changing in China. For instance, in December 1978, the 3rd plenary session of the 11th CPC Central Committee marked the start of China's reform and opening up. They set China on course for rapid economic growth. Each plenary session plays a different role.
No wonder the plenary meeting held behind closed doors has attracted much global attention, and there are conjectures galore on the potential content of the third historical resolution. The resolution marks a fierce ideological turn in China that will shape China's politics, economy and society in the coming decades. The call for unification will certainly impact the region, the neighborhood, particularly Hong Kong and Taiwan, that have been at the receiving end of Chinese aggression. Relying on ally US has been the only option for Taiwan, where tensions have soared to unprecedented levels between Taipei and Beijing.
There isn't anything specific in terms of a change in policy or a hardening of stance. It reiterates what we've already heard over the past few months and years, and the trajectory of policy essentially continues. But the broad message from the plenum is essentially that Xi Jinping's leadership is affirmed for the future, and there's an endorsement of his domestic and foreign policies. So that means that you're going to see a continuation of that trajectory with regard to Hong Kong and Taiwan.
The meet comes at a time when Xi Jinping himself is facing resistance from within the party. Many believe that this is the reason for him not having left the country ever since the COVID outbreak, over 600 days now. In certain quarters, there is still insufficient unity of thinking within the party or insufficient cognition in the party's ideology. as the CCP faces pressing problems from the China-US competition, China-West ideological confrontation and Chinese economy's downside risks, which may intensify in the foreseeable future, the party feels an urgent need to unify its vision of the past and future and ensure that intra-party and party people unity remains unshakable under pressure.
Two important meetings in Afghanistan. One, the Delhi Regional Security Dialogue of the National Security Advisors of regional countries, and the second, the Troika Plus, held in Islamabad. Both discussed Afghanistan. Afghanistan's territory should not be used to shelter, finance or plan terrorist attacks or terrorist activities. That was the message from the Delhi Declaration. While Pakistan was invited, it chose to stay away. And China also stayed away, citing scheduling reasons.
A severe humanitarian crisis, food shortage, power outage, and much more. If things do not change soon, the human cost of the Taliban takeover in Kabul would be unfathomable. And that's what is worrying neighboring nations, particularly India.
Now I'd like to thank
India on Tuesday hosted a key security dialogue in New Delhi for a unified response to stop Afghanistan from hurtling into an abyss, one which could be exploited by terror outfits.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abu.
The national security advisors of 7 nations, including Russia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan attended the meeting. All nations that have a direct stake in peace in Afghanistan. The security situation of Afghanistan and its regional and global ramifications were discussed threadbare.
We all have been keenly watching the developments in that country. These have important implications not only for the people of Afghanistan, but also for its neighbors and the region. This is the time for close consultations amongst us, greater cooperation and interaction and coordination among the regional countries.
India raised concerns over terrorism threat, radicalization, drug trafficking, and called for humanitarian assistance to the Afghans.
I am confident that our deliberations will be productive, useful, and will contribute to help the people of Afghanistan and enhance our collective security.
Following the meeting, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the security chiefs of all 7 nations. Both Pakistan and China, who are fighting to legitimize the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, skipped the meeting.
मैं नहीं जाऊंगा जी, मैं नहीं जाऊंगा. एक स्पॉइलर जो है वो पीसमेकर बनने की कोशिश नहीं कर सकता.
While China cited scheduled reasons to skip the meet, Pakistan cried off, saying it did not see India as a peacemaker.
The US finally reopened its borders, lifting restrictions of travel from a list of countries which included Canada, Mexico and most of Europe, setting the stage for emotional reunions as also restarting of the airline and tourism industries which were decimated because of the pandemic. Here is a report.
It feels nice to kind of be returning to normal. I missed the opportunity to come down here and just the freedom to do it.
We're looking forward to this. This is a start. This isn't exactly where we want to be, but this is a great start. And we're just hoping for the drop of the test, and then we see people all the time.
US is one of the countries that suffered the most at the hands of COVID-19 pandemic. Scores of families lost their loved ones, and many are still struggling with the after effects of the virus. In one of the most stringent measures, the US had shut its borders for international travelers. But it is finally opening up. Lines moved quickly at San Diego's border with Mexico, the busiest crossing in the United States. Despite the added checks for vaccinations required to enter the country, many saw movement from Europe as well.
This COVID, it has been a very big hardship for me to see my family here in Germany. So I am so excited, very excited that this restriction has been lifted.
The restrictions, among the most severe in US history, kept families apart, including spouses who've not been able to hug in months. Grandparents whose grandchildren doubled in age since they last saw them, and uncles and aunts who've not met nieces and nephews who are now toddlers. The new rules also allow air travel from a series of countries from which it has been restricted since the early days of the pandemic, as long as the traveller has proof of vaccination and a negative COVID-19 test. American citizens and permanent residents were always allowed to enter the US, but the travel bans grounded tourists, thwarted business travellers, and often separated families. Like many others, Laura Martinez, a business owner from Mexico, has found relief in being able to cross back into the US.
I am a business owner, and due to the closing of the border, I had to buy merch here in Mexico, and it was more expensive. That is why being able to go back to the US means a lot to me, especially to the economy of my household.
Airlines are preparing for a surge in activity after the pandemic restrictions caused international travel to plunge. The 28 European countries that were barred under the US policy that just ended made up 37% of overseas visitors in 2019. The US will accept travellers who've been fully vaccinated with any of the shots approved for emergency use by World Health Organization, not just those in use in the US, but millions of people worldwide who have not received vaccines approved by WHO, including Sputnik V, China's CanSino, won't be able to travel to the United States.
Weeks of hectic negotiations and no clear outcome or commitment or will to be the change to fight climate change. That is the sum of all the negotiations that took place at the Glasgow Climate Summit. World leaders met, climate influencers and environmentalists spoke at the conference, but the net zero emissions targets laid out by various countries was unsatisfactory to say the least, and experts believe that it will not help contain global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Bahar Dutt with this ground report.
Bold and hard decisions have to be made if you care about the planet. That is the simple truth.
In the ground, just keep it in the ground.
Amid protests at COP26 summit in Glasgow, world leaders gathered to hammer out an agreement to keep the Earth's temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius. But that's easier said than done.
A new plan to conserve global forests.
Economist Lord Stern, in an interview to India Today, stated that the announcement by India was the most significant news coming out of COP26.
And I'm sure that India today is ahead of the curve in understanding these issues. This is a transformation of the Indian economy. This is a whole new set of investment opportunities. It's a leapfrogging for India. It gives India cities where you can move and breathe and be productive, ecosystems which are robust and fruitful, because a lot of the investment will come in agriculture and storing degraded land and forests, as well as in the Indian railways and electricity supply and city structures. This is a very exciting moment.
In spite of the praise coming in for India, finance has still been stuck. Not much money has been put on the table by the developed world. Efforts leading up to and in climate talks have trimmed a couple tenths of a degree from future warming, but still not near enough to reach any of the international goals, according to an analysis by an authoritative independent group of scientists.
If we look at the climate targets that countries have put forward for 2030 only, and forget about what they propose afterwards, we reach a temperature level of 2.4 degrees by the end of the century. That for me is the current most likely estimate, because countries have in the past been quite good to implement what they propose in the short term in aggregate. So with everything unchanged, we are likely to be in that area, 2.4 degrees, which is still catastrophic climate change and far, far away from the goals of the Paris Agreement, which are well below 2 and in the direction of 1.5 degrees.
The world has already warmed 1.1 to 1.2 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times. If all the submitted national targets and other promises are included, then future warming drops down to 2.1 degrees. And in the optimist scenario, if all the net zero pledges for mid-century are taken into account, and they have very little substance in them, warming would be 1.8 degrees.
There are some serious toddler steps wanting to lean in, but they are not the leaps we need to see by any stretch of the imagination. And so but of course we do appreciate everybody who's seeking to make that stretch. But it will take everyone, and it will of course especially take the G20 economies that are responsible for 78% of all global emissions. That's where the real wins will be had. And yes, the wealthy G20 economies have a historical responsibility under the convention, but everyone that has such a vast emission load has a responsibility and needs to stretch.
The climate talks in Glasgow made some serious toddler steps, but far from giant leaps needed towards cutting emissions to limit global warming to internationally accepted goals.
Pledges have been made to reduce deforestation, curb methane and carbon emissions. The biggest announcement has been from the Scottish government pledging $1.4 million to the developing world. Many consider this as a big amount symbolically because it's the first acceptance of loss and damage and the historical responsibility of the developed world. As far as India is concerned, the big announcement by Prime Minister Modi, The Guardian reported it as the happiest news of the week and also the most significant. It now remains to be seen if the world community can come together to curb temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
Nobel laureate and campaigner for girls' education Malala Yousafzai, who was shot by the Taliban when she was just 15 and survived, announced on social media that she's gotten married. Here's a report.
I want every girl and woman to be proud of herself.
Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai announced on social media Tuesday that she has gotten married. The 24-year-old, who lives in Britain, said she and her new husband, who she named only as Asser, had wed in the city of Birmingham and celebrated at home with their families. Her post on Twitter read in part, "Today marks a precious day in my life. Asser and I tied the knot to be partners for life." Malala survived being shot at the age of 15 by a Taliban gunman in her native Pakistan in 2012. She is revered in many parts of the world, especially in Western countries, for her personal courage and her eloquence in advocating for the rights of girls and women. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In Pakistan, her activism has divided public opinion. Malala gave no other information about her husband apart from his first name. Internet users identified him as Asser Malik, general manager of the Pakistan Cricket Board's High School Performance Center. Reuters could not confirm this.
Time for World at a Glance, where we take you through some other stories doing the rounds from across the globe.
American journalist Danny Fenster has been sentenced to 11 years in prison in Myanmar. He was found guilty on several charges, including incitement for allegedly spreading false or inflammatory information. Junta government of Myanmar cracked down hard on press freedom, shutting virtually all critical outlets and arresting about 100 journalists roughly 30 of whom remain in jail, according to a local monitoring group, since its February coup. A pair of diamond bracelets once owned by the last Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, sold for $8.2 million at Christie's auction in Geneva. These opulent bracelets are among the rare pieces of jewellery from the ill-fated French royal that were still up for public sale. After Marie Antoinette's death in the French Revolution in 1793, the bracelets that had been commissioned some 17 years earlier were passed on from her daughter Marie Therese and kept within royal lineage for over 200 years. A SpaceX capsule carrying 4 astronauts pulled up Thursday at the International Space Station, their new home until spring. It took 21 hours for the flight from NASA's Kennedy Space Center to the glittering outpost. The station's welcoming committee consisted of 3 astronauts instead of the originally planned 7. That's because SpaceX returned 4 of the station residents on Monday, after the new arrivals' launch kept getting delayed. The new crew will spend the last 6 months at the space station and during that time host 2 groups of visiting tourists. Russia will launch the first bunch in December and SpaceX the second in February.
That's all on the show. Thanks for watching. News and updates do continue on the other side. Stay tuned to India Today.